Here's a question for you. Do we really have as much control in our lives as we think we do? It's a fascinating tension, isn't it? This really deep human desire we have for control, kind of bumping right up against the messy reality of influence. Today, we're doing a deep dive into a whole stack of sources, exploring power, influence, and this really intriguing idea of the illusion of control.
Mm.
We're going to look at how these dynamics play out basically everywhere. Our closest relationships, leadership roles, even inside our own heads.
Right. And our mission today is really to pull out the most important sort of nuggets of knowledge from all this research. We want to help you understand not just what these dynamics are, but crucially, why they matter for you and maybe how you can navigate them a bit more effectively. Think of it as getting you quickly up to speed on something that honestly touches almost everything we do.
Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. When these sources talk about power, what exactly do they mean? What's the definition we're working with here?
Well, broadly, they define power as the capacity or ability to change the beliefs, attitudes, or behaviors of others. Pretty straightforward. And then social influence is basically the attempts to affect or change other people. But, what's really fascinating here is how often we mix up that ability to influence with actual control.
Yeah.
One source really hammers this point home, stating flat out, control is an illusion. You can't truly control another person. You can influence them, sure. But control, that's different. And it's a subtle shift, maybe, but it has huge implications for how we approach, well, everything, every interaction.
That is a profound shift, yeah. It makes you wonder, okay, if control is an illusion, where does the strong feeling of being in control come from? Let's dive into that, the illusion of control, this cognitive bias where we genuinely believe we have more influence over events than we actually do.
Mm-hmm. So the obvious next question is, where does this show up, in everyday life? And the sources give plenty of examples, like wearing your lucky jersey for the big game, thinking it actually helps your team win, or, that feeling in a casino maybe where you think you can somehow predict or influence the dice roll. What happens is people remember the wins really vividly when they wore the jersey or made the roll, right? But they conveniently kind of forget all the losses. And that just reinforces the mistaken belief. It's a neat mental trick we play on ourselves.
Yeah, I can see that. And it's not just these kinds of superstitions, is it? One study we looked at found that people in positions of power are actually more prone to this illusion. They tend to overestimate their own abilities. For example, high-power individuals in the study were much more likely to choose to roll dice themselves if there was a reward. They seemed to genuinely believe they could influence the outcome more so than people with less power.
Right. It's almost like the feeling of having social power leaps into this belief of having, physical or probabilistic control.
Exactly.
And if you zoom out and look at the bigger picture, this bias can have really significant, sometimes devastating consequences, especially for leaders. Think about a CEO who feels very powerful. They might genuinely overestimate their ability to make a risky merger succeed, And that overconfidence can lead straight to huge financial losses. It suggests, as one source puts it, that the illusion of personal control might be one of the ways in which power often leads to its own demise.
Wow, that's a really powerful warning.
It is. It's a strong cautionary tale about what can happen with unchecked confidence fueled by power.
It makes me wonder, though, why? Why does power make us more susceptible? Is it just ego, or is there something more psychological going on?
Well, it seems like a mix of things. Power often leads to increased optimism, a focus on potential rewards, which isn't always bad.
Yeah.
But it can also mean paying less attention to risks, to potential downsides. Combine that with a stronger sense of self-efficacy, really believing in your own ability to get things done, and you can see how someone in power might genuinely think they can shape outcomes more than reality allows.
Okay, that makes sense. So if this illusion affects how we see external events, what about our own internal world, our choices? One source we read even brings up the illusion of free will. You mentioned neuroscience research, Benjamin Libet's work, suggesting our brain might make decisions fractions of a second before we're consciously aware of making them. And it also connected this to Eastern ideas like karma, this concept that our actions are deeply influenced by past events, our environment, our biology, creating this whole chain of cause and effect.
Right. And look, the whole free will debate is massive, philosophical, centuries old. We could spend hours just on that. But the key theme here, I think, is this recurring idea that our sense of control, our autonomy, might be much less absolute than we like to think. You even see it reflected in popular culture. That show Mr. Robot uses the line, "control is an illusion."
Yeah.
It taps into this feeling that maybe collective beliefs or external forces or even our own subconscious processes are shaping things much more than our conscious self realizes.
That really is a mind-bending thought. It challenges something so fundamental about how we see ourselves. So, okay, if our minds can trick us about control over events and even our own choices, how does this play out in, say, our closest relationships? Let's bring it closer to home. Romantic relationships, for instance.
Yeah, good place to look. Psych Central highlights three really common power dynamics that can cause a lot of friction. There's demand withdrawal, distance to pursuer, and fear shame. And these often pop up around recurring themes, like money, sex, making big decisions, even just who does what around the house.
Okay, tell us a bit more about those three. Demand withdrawal.
So in demand withdrawal, one partner feels like their needs aren't being met, so they start demanding maybe more attention, more help, whatever it is. The other partner feels pressured, maybe criticized, so they withdraw, avoid the topic, shut down. And this leads to this cycle of frustration, often blowing up over seemingly small things like, the classic argument about the dishes.
Right, I think many people can recognize that one. What about distance or pursuer?
This is where one partner seems more invested, wants more closeness, more connection. That's the pursuer. The other partner, the distancer, feels maybe smothered or just needs more space, they pull back. Often this links back to our early attachment styles, how we learn to relate based on our caregivers. Like someone with dismissive caregivers might learn to minimize closeness as an adult. Different love languages can play a role too. Maybe one partner shows love with lots of texts, which feels overwhelming, like pursuing, to the partner who needs space.
And the last one, fear shame.
Yeah, this one's often deeper. It plays on insecurities, past emotional pain, maybe unresolved trauma. Fear of vulnerability or shame about perceived flaws can lead someone to either withdraw completely or become quite aggressive as a way to protect themselves.
Wow, those dynamics sound, well, pretty challenging and very common, I'd imagine. So what do the sources suggest for resolving these? How do couples get out of these cycles?
Fundamentally, it boils down to a few key things.
Hmm.
Building trust, allowing for vulnerability, really committing to respectful communication, and validating each other's feelings. So for example, with the distancer pursuer, maybe the distancer makes an effort to initiate a date night, stepping out of their comfort zone to meet their partner's need for connection. Or maybe both partners actively try to understand and speak the other's love language, thinking about how the other person receives love, not just how they prefer to give it. And for that fear-shame dynamic, it's about finding the courage to actually name the vulnerability, to trust your partner with it. The source gave an example, like feeling self-conscious about weight gain in a swimsuit. A partner's validating response isn't just dismissal, but acknowledging the feeling and offering reassurance, like, "I'm sorry you feel that way. I'm going to make sure to tell you how attractive I find you." It's about meeting the vulnerability with care.
That takes real effort and trust on both sides.
It absolutely does.
Okay, so moving beyond personal relationships, what about work? How do these power dynamics shape things in organizations and teams?
Well, zooming out to the organizational level, one source puts it quite bluntly, power tends to corrupt its users. There's actually a documented cycle of power. It goes something like this. Gaining power often leads to wanting more power. This reinforces the belief that you're in control, which can lead to viewing subordinates as less capable or less worthy. That increases social distance, makes you feel separate, and further boosts your own self-esteem, sometimes artificially. It's a feedback loop.
A corrupting cycle. But is it, inevitable, or are there ways to counteract that?
Good question. It doesn't seem totally inevitable. The research suggests awareness is a huge first step. Things like building in systems of accountability, deliberately fostering empathy, maybe through structured interactions with people at different levels, and genuinely valuing diverse viewpoints can act as sort of brakes on that cycle.
That's critical because, as the sources point out, unequal power within teams is really damaging. It leads to mistrust, less open communication.
Exactly. And ultimately, poorer decision-making. What happens is the high-status people tend to talk more, dominate the conversation. And the lower status members, they might have really valuable insights, maybe even disagree with the direction things are going, but they often stay silent. Fear of judgment, maybe, or just feeling like their voice won't matter.
And that silence kills creativity, right? Kills innovation.
Absolutely.
Right.
If people don't feel safe to speak up, you lose out on those diverse perspectives that spark new ideas. So this means teams really need to work consciously actively to try and equalize power dynamics. Using clear group norms that encourage everyone to speak up, ensuring psychological safety, it also really highlights the value of minority influence.
Minority influence, what's that?
It's when an individual or a small subgroup who holds a different opinion from the majority consistently and confidently argues their point. Even if they don't win the argument outright, just their persistence can force the rest of the team to rethink assumptions, consider alternatives. And that process often leads to more flexible thinking, better problem solving, and ultimately more innovation. It stops the groupthink.
That's a really interesting point. It's not just about majority rule. So if we circle back to this core idea, control is an illusion, influence is real. How do we actually use that influence effectively, especially in leadership or just interacting day to day?
Right, the focus shifts, doesn't it? Away from trying to force control towards cultivating influence. And one source, Full Focus, offered 4 really practical ways to become a person of influence.
Okay, what are they?
First, focus on yourself. Basically, walk your talk. Modeling the behavior you want to see is the most powerful way to teach or influence others. Hypocrisy kills influence fast.
Makes sense. What's second?
Second, take the initiative. Don't wait around pointing fingers or playing the blame game when things go wrong. Look for opportunities to step up, to act, to propose solutions. Proactivity builds influence.
Okay, third.
Third, cast the vision. People are motivated by more than just tasks. They want to feel part of something bigger, something significant. Give them a compelling picture of a better future, a challenge they can rise to.
And the last one?
Finally, number 4, appreciate the effort. This sounds simple, but it's huge. Everyone, even people who report directly to you, is essentially a volunteer. At some level, they choose how much effort and engagement to bring. A sincere thank you, genuine recognition for hard work goes an incredibly long way in building loyalty and motivating people.
Those 4 points focus on self, initiative, vision, appreciation. They seem to connect directly to this idea of empowerment in organizations, right? Shifting authority down.
Exactly. It's about moving away from top-down control and towards enabling people at all levels.
So why is empowerment actually so important? What are the tangible benefits?
Well, the research points to quite a few. Empowerment boosts motivation, job satisfaction, people's confidence in their own abilities. It encourages folks to look for ways to improve things continuously, to innovate. And interestingly, it often leads to better customer service because empowered employees feel they have the authority to solve customer problems on the spot.
But it's not always easy to implement, is it? What's the resistance?
Often the resistance comes from managers. They might fear losing their own status, or they worry about accountability if things go wrong when decisions are delegated. It highlights that tension again. You have to be willing to let go of that illusion of control to gain the real benefits of widespread influence and engagement.
Okay, let's shift slightly to how we express power or influence through our actual behavior. The sources talked about 3 styles: passive, aggressive, and assertive. Let's start with passive. It looks polite, maybe deferential, avoids conflict. What's the downside?
Well, for the passive person themselves, it often leads to bottled up stress, resentment, feeling overlooked and taken advantage of. Their needs don't get met. And for others interacting with them, it can create uncertainty. You don't really know where they stand or what they truly want. Now, it might be situationally useful, say in a really heated argument, to de-escalate, or when dealing with someone in a much higher position of authority where direct confrontation isn't wise, but as a default style, not healthy.
Okay, then there's aggressive. Forceful, critical, maybe negative, very focused on winning, getting their way. This style can get short-term results, presumably.
It can sometimes. It can push things forward, but the cost is usually high. It breeds resentment, defensiveness, destroys trust, and shuts down collaboration.
So when, if ever, is it appropriate?
Really only in genuine emergencies where immediate, unquestioned action is needed. Or maybe, very occasionally, to break a serious stalemate where progress is completely blocked. But those are exceptions. Day to day, it's damaging.
Which brings us to assertive. Clear, confident, open communication. Taking responsibility, solving problems directly, but also willing to listen, willing to compromise.
Yes. And this is consistently flagged as the most effective and appropriate style for teamwork, for interactions between equals, for healthy relationships generally.
And what's really interesting is the link back to power dynamics.
Right. The sources suggest that assertiveness isn't just an individual trait, it's often a reflection of equal power distribution within a group. If you want people to be assertive, to speak up openly and honestly, You need to create an environment where power differences are minimized, where people feel safe and valued.
That's a key insight. It's not just on the individual to be assertive. The environment needs to allow it. And the good news, the sources say, is that assertiveness is a skill you can develop.
Absolutely. There are techniques you can learn and practice. Things like active listening, really hearing the other person, giving positive recognition alongside constructive feedback, clearly and calmly stating your own needs and expectations, learning how to say no, firmly but politely when necessary, and also knowing when to practice assertive withdrawal, stepping back from a conversation that's become too heated or unproductive, without being passive or aggressive about it.
So it's about finding that middle ground, advocating for yourself without steamrolling others or disappearing completely.
Precisely. That balanced approach.
Wow. Okay, what a journey we've been on in this deep dive. From the subtle tricks our own minds play on us about control, all the way to these complex power dynamics shaping our relationships at home and teams at work.
Yeah, and I think the big takeaway is that while absolute control might well be an illusion, our ability to influence is very, very real and quite powerful. It really comes down to understanding these subtle forces, fostering better, more open communication, and recognizing that often our own behavior, how we model things, is the strongest lever we have.
So maybe a final thought for you listening. If control truly is an illusion, what's one small act of influence you could focus on today? Maybe in a relationship or at work. What's one opportunity you have right now to model a kind of interaction or behavior you'd like to see, knowing that that influence is where your real power lies?